Since COVID, we've gotten way more used to using the internet for long periods of time if we weren't already doing so. COVID included a nasty side effect, which is the passive, mindless scrolling and content consumption of YouTube, Instagram, and Netflix. Since it's super addictive and easy, there's almost no visible cost to watching that extra video or scrolling more, waiting for our next chance to find another video on YouTube or another hot chick on Instagram and satisfy our dopamine needs. And with nothing else to do back then, most of us got hooked. My specific vices at the end of 2023 were YouTube and Instagram, and I felt like such a zombie clicking the YouTube home button constantly, and eventually, after about 5 times of finding nothing relevant, it made me think, what the fuck am I doing? It's really no different than flipping the channels on a TV. After arriving in that situation of guilt and knowing that I can do better hundreds of times, my brain finally kicked into gear, thinking replace this bored feeling and dependence on online media and do something engaging like read a book. And now anytime I click the YouTube home button and nothing comes up, I go right to reading or doing something that isn't super passive most of the time. This stack of books is everything I read this year. It includes about 4,900 pages and I'm pretty proud of myself. This is living proof that you can replace your online addiction like I did. Make a New Year's goal like I did in 2024 and try to do your new activity when you're in the depths of the YouTube algorithm. It doesn't have to be books either, it can be whatever. Just try to make it actively engaging. And no, replacing YouTube with going to Instagram doesn't count. I'm just showing off my book stack because it's tangible and you want to give yourself bragging rights when you look back in a year, right? So for all of you who are interested, I'll go over what each of these books was in a sentence and very quickly give it a rating and how easy it was to digest. Starting off with Influence by Dr. Tim Moran. This book's pretty good. It was a little bit unexpected because it's a book that really talks about how to talk to people and give them compliments and what it can do to the psyche of humans when you choose words that are much better than "you did a good job" or "nice." It's fascinating, and it specifically talks about how it has to do with impact on children and how using the opposite effect can also be devastating to children. I would give this book an 8 for its unusual topic. By the way, I'm using 1 to 10, just keep it simple. Since I have experience in tax accounting, this book was actually very enjoyable for me to read because it basically filled in the holes of the stuff I didn't understand when I was at my first job. I got my feet wet, I understood certain structures and entities, but this book went over the at least basics of the stuff I really didn't understand and the tax strategies that you can use. Overall, I would give this book a 9, probably a 10 if you're a person who really has no understanding for accounting. This book breaks it down very, very simply and easily. And the effort that you have to put into this book will probably be an 8 because it does break it down into easy stuff, but you still have to kind of focus if it's new to you. But for me, who has background experience in accounting, I'd probably only put in like a 6. A lot of this knowledge was second nature to me. Okay, the game of work. I've done a review on this on my channel actually, but this book was excellent. I give it an 8 on the topic material and a 6 on putting in effort. For people who really like sports, this book is excellent because it defines work and activities that we do in the confines of sports analogies, and I find it extremely helpful. And it does an excellent job of explaining why it's so easy for us to jump into sports and play games with other people, but when we go to work and try to work with other people, it can be such a pain in the ass. Okay, Relentless by Tim Grover. I would give this book a 6. It wasn't the most interesting material ever. It talks a lot about Kobe Bryant and Jordan type players who are just absolutely ruthless in their training, and they really go next level, taking no days off for celebration and being the team leaders. It talks about average players, really good players, and then excellent next level, once in a generation, more or less type players. This guy was the coach for some of these excellent players. Behind every excellent player is a great coach, and now we're getting into books that were read more than like 2 or 3 months ago for me. And The 7 Habits of Effective People is interesting because it's not like it focuses on any one single topic, but it goes over 7 things, and while it doesn't always talk about the most specific stuff, I think the overall good qualities in a very good general person. I remember this book being surprisingly good at giving parenting strategies. I would give this book a 7 or a 7.5, and it was very easy to digest, so I give it an 8 on the easy to digest scale. The next book we have to talk about is Discrimination and Disparities by Thomas Sowell. If you don't know who Thomas Sowell is, he's probably one of the most intelligent people on the planet right now. He's very intellectual and looks at things on a very, very big macroeconomic scale. So this book naturally is going to fit into the political scale. This book was a 10 in the intensity scale. You need to really focus when you read this. I would give this an 8.5 or a 9. It tells me a lot of stuff that I already kind of knew, but for the new stuff, it brought some very interesting perspectives. This book is well worth the read, and even if you're not into political stuff, this book looks at life and the relationship between humans in such a fascinating light. One of the most interesting things I remember from this book was when we look at people in the ghetto, there's plenty of people that are in, good people that are in the ghetto, of course. It makes the relationship between the cost for the person to look at it. If you're in the hood and you see a bunch of people that look like they might own guns, it's too cost prohibitive for you to individually assess each individual person, and you just group them together. And that's just what we do as human beings. I guess this is more psychological than it does look at politics, but it plays into politics, but this is still a fantastic book. The next book we go over is Leaders Eat Last. What I like about this, while I can't remember exactly what this book talked about, a lot of it was kind of dealing with the corporate environment and relationships between trends of policies and corporations. This book is really psychological. It looks more at the human psyche, but looking at it through the business perspective. It looks at relationships and how those are important in the business sense, but this book was pretty good. I give it a 7 out of 10 and a 6 out of 10 on the intensity scale. You don't have to read this too intensely. The Go-Giver is probably the most simple book in all of this. It's a very, very quick story about a man who meets another very rich guy, and they go to 5 different places and meet 5 different people who all have something interesting or unique to share with the main character. I read this in one day. This is a 1 out of 10 on the intensity scale, and I would give it an 8 out of 10 on the perspective it brings. Of course, this short story is very fun to read and easy. The next book we get to talk to is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. This is a really good book. The first part of the book is pretty brutal, reading about his rough upbringing, but after that it goes into basically the limits of your human psyche. The dude's a total psychopath and runs marathons with no preparation. He doesn't train for them, he just goes into them. And what he proves through the book is you can just keep going. When you think you're finished, you can just keep going regardless. And the whole reason he was able to do a lot of these marathons or very incredible feats is because he just kept going. He didn't stop. For me, I think to my 3-mile run, if I do it, I haven't run 3 miles in a long time, but when I do it, I feel pretty tired. And the one time I did run a 10K was absolutely exhausting. And this guy did 4 times that. So I'm just thinking, if I had to run 26 miles on no rest and go through all 26 miles like that, I mean, that's just a filthy thought. But it applies to the rest of our lives, because when you think you're down and out and when you think you can't keep doing something, you can just choose to keep going. Even if it's really painful, you have the power to choose no matter what. When we're doing weightlifting, when we're doing whatever, you can always keep going. I would give this an 8.5 or 9 out of 10 overall, and the intensity scale is probably like a 6. Oh man, now one of my favorite books of all time, The Creature from Jekyll Island. This book is phenomenal. This book is an auto 10 for me, but also on the intensity scale, you need to be really focused when you read this. I would give it a 9 on the intensity scale. It's not necessarily political, but it does give commentary on society and a lot of the banking. There are 2 really interesting things in this book that are worth highlighting. It talks about how banking began about 500 years ago. This is not old technology. It's actually pretty new in the grand scale of things. And how banking is really just kind of a trick in itself, at least when it's based on fiat, or it's not backed by something like gold or something like this. It's very fascinating. It's 600 pages. And the second most important thing I would say with this book was, when we're the United States and we're as powerful as we are, and we give out loans to these countries that have no intentions or ability to pay them back, what happens when they default? Well, when they default and those countries can't pay the money back because they've spent it all, whether it's on corruption or they've spent it on things very ill-advised, who ends up paying it back is usually the taxpayer of the Americans. The person who ends up paying it back is the American taxpayer, and that's really fucked up. We shouldn't be footing the bill to try to make other countries great, especially in a world where there's infinite needs and limited supply. This book is highly recommended. The next book is How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. Now, I've never been a huge salesman, but this is a very quick and short read and does a pretty good job of overlining some very, very general stuff for salespeople. I've been recommended this book and I thought I would read it, and this is a very easy read. I would give it a 7 out of 10 rating, and I would give it a 5 on the intensity scale. And now we get to another phenomenal book, The Fourth Turning. This is probably my favorite book of the year. This is a 10 out of 10 book. There's no other way to put it. And on the intensity scale, this does require a lot of focus. This is not an easy read, but it's highly, highly recommended. If there's no other book you want to read, this book isn't even really political. It just does a phenomenal job of outlining generations and how we go from generation to generation and what their impact can be on society and how it turns into the next generation. We've all heard the saying that every 80 years there's a big conflict. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. Something like that. This book does an excellent job of looking at those generations and outlining it. The book was a little bit dry in the middle, but other than that, I think the book was phenomenal. It has a great part about the future section. It's played out reasonably well. And the book is very, very written down to earth. The book was astonishingly written in 1997, and it predicts that our current crisis will end in around 2032, 2030, 2025, something like that. I think that with certain people having been elected recently, that's only going to put fuel to the fire for both sides on this. So something will probably happen in the next few years for sure. This book is just easily one of the best books I've ever read. We back ourselves into a corner every 80 years, and we come out of it a little stronger, but then, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and then there's a huge crisis that comes down to it. I probably need to do a book review video about this in depth, but that could take like 2 hours. A video on this book would take forever because it is so relevant and super, super good. I'm going to read some Civil War books first before I make a video about this book. Overall, this is top 3 favorite books I've ever read. And now we get to The Black Swan. This has been a very culturally relevant and well-known book for a while. And it has a lot of novel ideas in here, and I highly recommend reading it. I would give it an 8 out of 10 on the awesome scale, and intensity is probably a 7 or 8. One of the best analogies found in this book is about the turkey. For about 1,000 days, there's this turkey on a farm, and he walks around, does whatever he wants, and then suddenly, right before Thanksgiving, he gets killed. For us, naturally, as the higher power to a turkey, we always know we were going to kill the turkey because we need to have turkeys for Thanksgiving. How could the turkey have predicted something like that, like his own death out of the blue, when he had 1,000 days in a row of no death, walking around doing whatever he wants, and suddenly he dies? To all the information that the turkey has, he has no data representing that. So because that data is absent, he has no way to predict it. So in the society of turkeys, how could they predict death? It just makes an excellent analogy and point that when we look at all the experts and all this other stuff, people aren't really experts because we only look at the data metrics that we have. There's plenty of other stuff going on other than data metrics that we're not observing, and those influence things very importantly. When it comes to a lot of these experts, there's a lot of smoke that they blow up people's ass because they look at all the data they have saying like, oh, the market's been great for 50 years, or the market's been great for 20 years. Oh yeah, it's been real. Oh, the market's been impenetrable. How could you not do this, right? But like the turkey, they might not have all the data, even if there's something in the background running on that could be very influential. Thanksgiving could be coming up and your head could be on the chopping block and you might not even know it. Very much recommend this book. And now for one of the most controversial books, Atlas Shrugged. This bad boy is 1,200 pages. I've heard about this book over and over again being an excellent book. When I opened it, I didn't expect it to be a story or a novel, but it ended up being that. This book is so insanely controversial, mainly for part 3. This book is extremely political because the commentary it puts on government and the relationship between government and people who are producing stuff in the economy is pretty much the whole point of the book. This book goes off on the unproductive people in society and also goes off on big inefficient government and just goes off on in government in general. This is a 10 out of 10 book, and this is probably only a 6 out of 10 on the intensity scale, but if you're not a political person whatsoever, you probably want to focus on this a little more, especially part 3 of the book, so I would give it about an 8.5 for a normal person. And with that, you've got all the books that I read this year. Try to replace your vices with something a little more productive. For me, it's reading. For you, maybe it's going outside, going for a walk, or something like that. But the worst thing that we can do is just sit at YouTube hitting the home button over and over, or going on Instagram and scrolling over and over and over, hoping something interesting comes up on our newsfeed. When you're hitting the YouTube home button over and over again, you have to think to yourself, in 55 years, do I want to look back at this moment and be happy about it? You're going to be on your deathbed one day, and you're going to be thinking, oh man, I wasted so much time on YouTube just looking at meaningless stuff. It's a very slow, painful process to get rid of addictions like YouTube and Instagram, and when you look back on it, you'll be happy you did it. And to finish the video, I'm going to leave you with the Excel ratings.